The flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness. Johnny Cash crawled deeper into Nickajack Cave, dragging his broken body across jagged limestone. He'd come here to die. What he found instead would either destroy him completely or save his soul. It was October 1967. Nobody knew where Johnny Cash had gone. Not his manager, not his bandmates, not June Carter, who'd been desperately trying to save him for years. He'd disappeared into the Tennessee wilderness with nothing but a flashlight, a bottle of pills, and a death wish that had been growing stronger every single day. But something was waiting for him in those caves. Something that would change everything. 3 weeks earlier, Johnny had walked out of his final court appearance. Another drug possession charge. Another humiliating headline. The judge had been lenient, but the look in his eyes said everything. You're killing yourself. And we're all watching it happen. Johnny's hands shook as he climbed into his Jeep. He'd lost 40 pounds. His face was gaunt, hollow. People who'd known him for years barely recognized him anymore. The man in black looked more like a ghost. He drove home to his lakeside house outside Nashville. The place was empty. Vivian had taken the girls months ago. The divorce papers sat on the kitchen table, unsigned. He stared at them for an hour, unable to move. Then he reached for the pills. Amphetamines, barbiturates, whatever he could find. He swallowed them by the handful, chasing them with whiskey. The edges of the room started to blur. His phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again, and again. Finally, he answered. Johnny, where have you been? June's voice was strained, exhausted. We had rehearsal. You missed the show in Memphis. People are worried. I'm fine, Johnny slurred. You're not fine. You're dying, and I can't. Her voice broke. I can't keep watching you do this to yourself. The line went dead. Johnny stared at the phone in his hand. The woman who'd stood by him through everything, who'd pulled him back from overdoses, who'd canceled shows when he was too wrecked to stand, had finally given up. He was alone. That night, Johnny sat in his house with a loaded gun on the table. He'd hit bottom so many times he didn't think there was anywhere left to fall. But now he knew. There was always further to fall. The pills scattered across the floor mocked him. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, the shell of a man who'd once dominated country music. He thought about his daughters, about the look on Vivian's face when she'd finally left, about June's voice on the phone, breaking with despair, about everyone he'd disappointed, everyone he'd hurt, everyone who'd believed in him until they couldn't anymore. The gun felt heavy in his hand. But something stopped him. Not hope, not faith, something darker. If he was going to die, it wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be clean. He deserved worse than that. He deserved to suffer. He knew exactly where to go. October 21st, 1967. 4 a.m. Johnny's Jeep bounced along a dirt road in the Tennessee wilderness, headlights cutting through fog. He'd been driving for 3 hours, heading toward Nickajack Cave on the Tennessee River. He'd explored these caves as a teenager, knew how deep they went, how easy it would be to get lost in their endless darkness. Perfect place to disappear forever. He parked at the cave entrance as dawn broke. Gray light filtered through the trees. The mouth of the cave yawned open like a wound in the earth, darkness so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. Johnny grabbed his flashlight, left everything else behind. His wallet, his guitar, his identity. He wouldn't need any of it where he was going. The cave entrance was massive, 50 feet high, like walking into the throat of some ancient beast. His footsteps echoed on wet stone. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. He walked deeper. The entrance light faded behind him until there was nothing but the narrow beam of his flashlight and endless black. Most people would have turned back. Most people would have felt the primal fear of being underground, enclosed by millions of tons of rock, cut off from the sun and sky and everything living. Johnny kept walking. Toward the darkness. Toward the end. The cave system stretched for miles underground. Tunnels branched in every direction. Some led to vast chambers. Others dead-ended in walls of limestone. A few dropped into pits so deep the bottom couldn't be seen. Johnny didn't care where he was going. He just kept moving forward, letting the cave swallow him whole. Hours passed. His flashlight began to dim. The batteries were dying. Soon he'd be in complete darkness, unable to find his way out, even if he wanted to. Good. He sat down on a rock ledge, legs dangling over a drop into nothing. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, no traffic, just the sound of his own breathing and the distant drip of water on stone. This was it. This was where Johnny Cash would die. Not on stage, not in a hospital, alone in the dark, slowly fading away like his flashlight battery. Forgotten. He closed his eyes, waited for death to come. But something else came instead. Johnny didn't know how long he'd been sitting there when he heard it. A voice. Faint, distant. Or maybe it was just his mind breaking down, creating sounds in the silence. Not yet. His eyes snapped open. The flashlight flickered. For a second, the darkness seemed to move, to shift, to take shape. Who's there? His voice was hoarse from days of pills and no water. Silence. Then, impossibly, he heard music. Faint hymns from his childhood. Songs his mother had sung when he was a boy in Arkansas. How great thou art. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Peace in the valley. Johnny's mother, Carrie, had died 5 years ago. Her last words to him had been a prayer. God's not done with you yet, son. Don't you give up. He'd carried that guilt ever since, the disappointment in her eyes when she'd learned about his drug addiction, the shame of knowing he'd broken her heart. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered into the darkness. I'm so sorry. The music faded. The darkness pressed in, and Johnny realized something that made his blood run cold. He didn't want to die. Not like this, not giving up, not letting the pills and the shame and the guilt win. His mother had believed in something better for him. June had fought for years to save him. His daughters deserved a father who tried. But it was too late now. The flashlight was almost dead. He'd crawled so deep into the cave system, he had no idea which way led out. Even if he wanted to live, even if he'd finally found the will to fight, the cave was going to kill him anyway. Panic hit him like a physical blow. He jumped to his feet, nearly fell off the ledge into the pit. His flashlight beam swung wildly across the walls, revealing nothing but endless tunnels in every direction. Help! His scream echoed through the chambers. Somebody help me! Nothing. He was miles underground. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody was coming. Johnny started running, picking tunnels at random, crawling through narrow passages, wading through underground streams. The flashlight dimmed further. Its beam turned from white to yellow to orange. He was completely lost. Hours blurred together, or maybe days. Time had no meaning in the absolute dark. Johnny's body screamed for water, for food, for pills. The withdrawal was starting, his hands shaking violently, cramps twisting his stomach. He collapsed against a wall, unable to go further. The flashlight gave one final flicker, and died. Absolute darkness swallowed him. The kind of darkness that made your eyes create shapes, colors, anything to fill the void. This was it. This was really it. Johnny Cash was going to die in Nickajack Cave, and nobody would ever find his body. But then something impossible happened. In the complete darkness, Johnny saw light. Not from a flashlight. Not from the entrance. A different kind of light. Soft. Warm. Coming from somewhere deep inside him. And he heard that voice again. Clearer now. "I'm not done with you yet." It wasn't his mother's voice. It wasn't June's. It was something else. Something that felt like coming home after years of being lost. Johnny didn't know if it was God or his own mind or the final hallucination before death. But something told him to stand up, to keep moving, to choose one direction and trust. He crawled forward in absolute darkness, hands scraped raw on stone, knees bleeding, every muscle screaming, but he kept moving. Then, impossibly, he felt something. A slight movement of air, the barest hint of a breeze. Fresh air meant an opening, meant a way out. Johnny crawled faster. The air current grew stronger. And then, like a miracle, he saw it. A pinpoint of gray light in the distance. So faint he thought he was imagining it. But it grew brighter with every step. The tunnel sloped upward. The darkness began to fade. And finally, after what felt like an eternity underground, Johnny Cash crawled out of Nickajack Cave into daylight. He collapsed on the ground outside the entrance, sobbing. His body was destroyed. His clothes were torn and bloody. But he was alive. More than that. For the first time in years, he wanted to be alive. A fisherman found him 3 hours later, barely conscious by the riverbank. The man didn't recognize the emaciated, filthy figure as Johnny Cash. He just saw someone who needed help. "You all right, buddy?" The fisherman knelt beside him. "What happened?" Johnny looked up at him, at the sky, at the sun he thought he'd never see again. "I got lost," Johnny said, "but I found my way out." The fisherman drove him to a hospital. Johnny refused to give his real name, terrified the press would find out. He called it food poisoning, exhaustion, anything but the truth. But he called June from the hospital payphone. She answered on the first ring. "Johnny?" Her voice was guarded, afraid of what she'd hear. "I need help," Johnny said, the words he'd never been able to say before. "I can't do this alone anymore. I need real help." The silence on the other end stretched for 10 seconds. "Where are you?" June asked. "Nashville General. But June, I mean it this time. I want to get clean. I want to live. I want—" His voice cracked. "I want another chance." June arrived 30 minutes later. She found him in a hospital bed, still covered in cave dirt, bandaged and broken. She didn't say anything, just pulled a chair next to his bed and took his hand. "I went into a cave to die," Johnny said quietly. "But something down there in the dark, it showed me I'm not done yet. I've still got something to do. I just don't know what." "You're going to get clean," June said firmly. "That's what you're going to do, and I'm going to help you. But Johnny, this is it. This is the last time. If you go back to the pills—" "I won't," Johnny said, and for the first time, he meant it. Getting clean was hell, worse than the cave. Johnny checked himself into a treatment facility, went through withdrawal that felt like dying, spent weeks in bed, shaking, sweating, hallucinating. The cravings were so intense he thought about running, about giving up, about going back to the pills. But every time he got close to breaking, he thought about the cave, about the darkness, about the choice he'd made to crawl toward the light instead of giving in to the void. June visited every day, brought him books, read him letters from fans who still believed in him, reminded him why he needed to stay clean. "You've got a concert in 2 months," she said one afternoon. "A prison. Bob Johnston's been trying to reach you." Johnny's head snapped up. "What prison?" "Folsom, in California. They want you to record a live album there." And suddenly, Johnny understood. This was what he'd survived for. This was the purpose that had pulled him out of the cave. Those men in prison, trapped like he'd been trapped, lost like he'd been lost, they needed to know redemption was possible. Because if Johnny Cash could crawl out of Nickajack Cave and choose to live, anyone could be saved. 2 months later, Johnny Cash walked into Folsom Prison, clean for the first time in years, strong, clear-eyed, ready. The inmates didn't know what he'd been through. Didn't know about the cave, about the darkness, about the moment he'd almost given up forever. They just saw a man who understood their pain, who saw them as human, who gave them hope. And Johnny? He saw himself reflected in their faces, saw the same darkness, the same desperation, the same desperate need for redemption. "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash," he said into the microphone, and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. The Folsom Prison album became his greatest success. But more important than the platinum records or the fame or the comeback was what it represented. Proof that the cave hadn't won. Proof that choosing life over death, light over darkness, hope over despair, could lead to something beautiful. Years later, after Johnny had rebuilt his life, married June, gotten clean and stayed clean, raised his children, created some of his greatest music, he was asked about his lowest moment, about the darkest time in his life. He thought about lying, about giving the sanitized version, but Johnny Cash had spent too many years lying. "I crawled into a cave in Tennessee to die," he said quietly. "Went as deep as I could go. Waited for the end. But God, or the universe, or whatever you want to call it, wasn't done with me yet. Showed me I had a choice. Darkness or light, death or life. And for the first time in years, I chose to live." June, sitting beside him, squeezed his hand. She'd never told anyone the full story of that October night when Johnny called from the hospital. Never revealed how close he'd come to vanishing forever. "The cave was a metaphor," Johnny continued. "We all have our caves, our private hells, places we go when we've given up on ourselves. But you can always crawl back toward the light. It's never too late. Even in the absolute darkness, even when you think you're lost forever, there's always a way out. You just have to choose it." He died in 2003, having lived 36 more years than he would have if the cave had won. 36 years of music, family, purpose, redemption. 36 years of fighting for the forgotten, the imprisoned, the lost. Because he knew what it meant to be all three. The man in black had found his purpose in the darkness, and he spent the rest of his life being a light for others trying to find their way out. It all started with one terrifying night in Nickajack Cave, when Johnny Cash looked into the void and chose to crawl back toward the light.